It's time for universal prayer. I would request you to stand up. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom, O hidden light, shining in every creature, O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with Thee know he is also one with every other. Kindly be seated. Good morning to all of you. Today's symposium is on the subject, What Leads to Insight? We have three eminent participants in this symposium. Professor C.A. Shinde from India, Mrs. Rezende from Brazil, and Mr. Gerard Brennan from Australia. I have this privilege to introduce them to you. First, Professor Shinde. Professor C.A. Shinde has been a life member of Theosophical Society and rendering his services to TS since 1975. Presently, he is residing in Adyar with his wife and working as the librarian of Adyar Library and Research Center since 2006. He is also secretary of Alcott Memorial Higher Secondary School. His background, a retired zoology professor and author of 10 textbooks in zoology for undergraduate students. He is well-known personality in Theosophical Society as he conducts seminars, workers' training camp, school of wisdom, study classes throughout India. His articles are published in The Theosophist, Wake Up India, Indian Theosophist, and many other Federation journals. He conducted retreat at Crotona Institute, California in 2014 for ES members, and recently gave endowment lecture in the University of Madras. I invite Brother Shinde to present his views on today's subject. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. Honorable International President, Brother Tim Boyd, respected Chairman, Sister Uma Bhattacharyya, I am very much thankful for her introducing and speaking more kind words about me, and also my co-speakers, Sister Resende and Brother Brennan coming from abroad. At the outset, let me express my thanks to all of you for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts, to explore the mysterious question in this symposium, what leads to insight? What leads to insight is need to be explored Because insight that we are inquiring about is related to intuition or prajna. Of course, intuition is the ability to understand immediately without the need of conscious reason. Without any effort, the intuition comes. But insight needs conscious reason. Insight is the wisdom that knows the nature of the object first, and also then the meaning of that object, the significance of that object, and maybe it is a momentary, and most of this time it is involuntary. One may say it is a kind of unfoldment, insight to inspiration to intuition. Intuition is the last step, but it begins from the insight and inspiration. Insight needs to be incubated to inculcate virtues or human values, as the insights are most probably in the form of flashes. So one needs to contemplate on them. In Sanskrit we say chintana, manana and nididhyasa is needed on whatever insight we get into. Right insight is the first step mentioned in the Eightfold Path of Buddha, because it is a question of perception. Insight is not the word of definition as we use in science, but it is the word that is to be discovered and explored. It cannot be defined. Surely, we don't have theories or blueprints for insight. So, exploration in true sense is an unfoldment. It is a journey from world of all possible sense data to the world of mind's potentialities, to the world of values, and then reaching, it is a way to approach to reality. The whole evolutionary trend, the whole unfoldment of consciousness process, or whole evolutionary trend is towards this increasing awareness of getting into insight into value-oriented life. We may say it is a journey from insight to inspiration to intelligence, or you can call it as intuition. So it is, in a words of experience, it is a journey from sympathy to empathy to compassion. Because highest point of intelligence is intuition, as Krishnamurti said many times. And he said, to me, keeping alive the intelligence is inspiration. To me, keeping alive the intelligence is inspiration. So in this sense, role of inspiration and insight is to infuse values in individuals, to incubate and inculcate. It is in true tense getting insight into virtues, And as we all know, crown of virtue is gratitude, and that comes only when one understands the interconnectedness, interrelatedness, and interrelationship. So, to explore the question, what leads to insight, the word insight itself indicates a deep view, a kind of penetrating vision, thorough knowledge or judgment, because insight is an intelligent grasp. It is a quick perception or it is a quick understanding. No doubt, there is profound collection of insight in the spiritual teachings and even in one's book of life. So one needs to perceive it. It is a matter of perception. And in Mahayana Buddhism, the term insight symbolized by a sword, the sword of insight that can cut through tangle of thoughts and negative emotions. H.P. Blavatsky also said, insight arises by practicing a clean life, an open mind, a pure heart. She said, insight is a byproduct of meditation and ethical living. The teaching says, if you live the life, wisdom comes. And when the wisdom comes, one puts himself right, getting insight into right living. He begins to listen before he speaks, begins to think before he acts, and he will always try his level best not to complain, but always ready to share and care and cooperate wholeheartedly. The beauty of insight is to know what it means to care. But the question is, how do we help ourselves to understand and deal with this faculty of insight, which is already in all of us? It reminds me an instance of a little schoolgirl. A little girl was cycling and suddenly she got down and picked up a piece of plastic bag that was lying on the road and threw it in a nearby dustbin. And again she remounted her cycle and went on. Look at this insight of the little girl. Nobody told her to do what she did. Is it not the indication that she had an inbuilt feeling for keeping the road clean? We do all have inbuilt insight of cleanliness. Cleanliness is the godliness, it is a virtue. She might have heard, but at that moment, it was a natural, spontaneous desire to keep the countryside beautiful. Unfortunately, such insight feeling gets destroyed as they grow up in this modern world of pleasure, ambition, success, and failures. The other characteristic feature of insight comes strangely, and it may come at any place. One may get insight in hospital, lying on the bed, that nothing is more than health. The other may get insight in prison, that freedom is the most serious thing. Another may get in the cemetery that uncertainty of life and certainty of death. In science also, we have read about such insight, and they discovered and invented many things that we know of Archimedes' principle, especially discovery of benzene ring through dream. He dreamt of serpents forming a ring by holding each other at the tail end. Another best example of insight is of a theosophist scientist, Thomas Alva Edison, who invented the light bulb that illuminated the whole world after sunset. So as human beings, each one of us is capable of receiving insight into many perspectives of life, either in waking state or in dreaming state or in immediately after getting the sound sleep. Otherwise, it is said it is a spiritual death, in the sense, if man does not get insight in his life to transfer his anger into tolerance, fear into adventure, hatred into forgiveness, jealousy into inspiration, then how can he make his life a great living? It is as good as life in vain, or as it is said, it is a spiritual death. So to get into insight of great living means healthy living, compassionate living, environmentally sustained living. Great living is passionate about harmlessness and desirelessness. Getting into such insight, many are now adopting vegan life. Dr. Annie Besant's insight into spiritualism, we know it is through the teaching of secret doctrine. And after that, she led a harmless and selfless, dedicated theosophic life. And the result of such insight, or result of such ethical living, is she gave us her marvelous insight of universal prayer, O hidden life. It is said theosophy is an ocean of wisdom teachings. There is a profound collection of insight, but it was kept secret, rahasya, for ages, as it was reserved to the few who prove themselves worthy. But by the beginning of this Theosophical Society, it has been made public by the great brotherhood. Perhaps great ones realized the progress of humanity to be capable of perception in this period. With this faith and with this hope, as members of the Theosophical Society, we all invoke together their help and guidance at the opening of each international convention here at Adyar. And you know, the serious students of Theosophy do find such profound collection of insight in the Theosophical teachings, like the abstract nature of the universe, interrelatedness of all creatures, the omnipresence of life, the polarity principle, the transcendence, the germination of worlds, and the most important great mystery is the ultimate mystery of divinity. So Theosophy in true sense is the wisdom religion, source of all religions. So it encourages study of comparative religion so that one may get insight into spirituality, into wisdom, and he will begin to appreciate Christians for their missionary activity, Jain and Zoroastrians for their harmlessness, Buddhists for their peace and compassion, Hindus for their patience and accommodative attitude, and thus one begins to see good in all. Not only good in all, but also he can find new meaning in symbology also. For instance, in Hinduism, there is a symbol of bow. You know that bow. A string, the arrow, the archer, and the target. In these, one may get insight to find out the meaning. The bow is as the Purusha, string as the Prakriti, arrow as the fourth energy, and archer as the universal creative intelligence Mahat, and target as the differentiated area in Prakriti, and he may get stimulated for creative and procreative activity, and even he may find new insight in the broken bow. The broken bow not only symbolizes both victory over sensuality and desire, but also sublimation of the creative life force of vehicles and form to their spiritual and universal expression. So in brief, I know the limitation of time. To sum up, what leads to insight? It is definitely an altruistic mindset and altruistic heart that makes the mind very still, without any thought or any burden of chattering noise, and makes the way to insight and expresses in the form of, as I said earlier, sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Let me end with a small story, but very inspiring and very relevant in this. That reminds me a small story. There was a noble tailor. All of you must have read this. A noble tailor who had become a great sage. The king came to pay the respects and presented him with a pair of golden scissors encrusted with diamond. But the sage refused to accept it. Then king asked, "What can I give you that can be used to you?" And the reply of tailor is something to contemplate, and I think relevant to know how the altruistic heart responds. The tailor said, "Give me the needle rather than scissor." The reason is symbolic but insightful and inspiring. The scissor cuts and divides. Our minds are like scissor, but the needle sieves the pieces together. So our hearts need to be like needle that loves and brings all pieces together. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shinde, for your inspiring and thought-provoking speech. Now our second speaker is Mrs. Rezende from Brazil. Before I invite her to speak here is a short introduction of her. Mrs. Rezende is a lawyer by profession. She has been a member of the Theosophical Society since 1968 She is an international speaker. Her specialization is on subjects like meditation, the teachings of H.P. Blavatsky, the Mahatma letters, and Jungian ideas on dreams and symbols. Since May 2014, she is the president of the Inter-American Theosophical Federation. She is also a member of National Board of Directors of the Theosophical Society in Brazil, Director of Communication Department of TS in Brazil. She is an eminent speaker and has been lecturing in Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, and many other countries, including USA, New Zealand, and Italy, and so many other countries. I would like her to share her views on the subject, what leads to insight. Mrs. Rezende.
Good morning. I was asked to tell you that the next meeting of the Inter-American Federation will be held in a cruise in May. If you want some more details, we can talk after. Well, my subject here, I will somehow repeat Mr. Shinde's words, although with other words. And my research was based especially on the Mahatma letters and HPB's writings. It's important to know that this is the biggest challenge we face in our lives. How to move from intellectual knowledge to spiritual insight. And there is no easy answer for that. The Mahatmas and HPB, they give some tips, some hints, some suggestion that we may apply in our lives, and we may move from intellectual knowledge to spiritual insight. It's very interesting. They tell us in letter number 10 that the way Hume used to deal with situations would never bring him beyond theoretical considerations. That applies to us. Depending on how we deal with situations, we may be caught in the field of intellectual knowledge. Depending on how we live, how we deal with situations, we may get to spiritual insight. There is a very well-known formula that shows the importance of study, meditation, and service. I would say that study, meditation, and service can lead us from intellectual knowledge to spiritual insight. And I would also add the steps of Kriya Yoga, Tapas, Svadhyaya, and Ishvara Pranidhana. And they are somehow linked to study, meditation, and service. Study is extremely important. It broadens up our world's view. It increases our understanding. It enlarges our panorama in life. When we start studying, we become familiar with the teachings. We get used to this idea, these ideas. This familiarity is very important. It's a previous step before we are able to put the teachings into practice. Because we and the 7 billion people in this planet are very much tied up by the mentality of our time. It's very interesting that the Mahatmas in letter number 15 would tell Synod that he was like a child asking for big theories of maths before even know the rules of simple arithmetics. So, and there is also a very subtle and important factor that the progress we make in studying the arcane knowledge can strengthen and refine the mysterious links of sympathy that keeps us together in rapport with the great beings that guide humanity. This link of sympathy is made by deep study. And they tell us, once this connection is established, this connection will help us to, this connection, they will help us to put us in contact with that chain of energy that binds together the material and the immaterial cosmos, that chain that we call past, present, and future, in order to quicken our perception so that we may clearly grasp not only things related to matter, but also to spirit. Let me repeat. To quicken our perceptions so as to clearly grasp not merely all things related to matter, but to spirit too. I think he's talking about insight. Clearly grasping. Well, but how do we study? Blavatsky, in the first article she wrote, she considered her first spiritual shot. It's an article called Hereafter, published in 1875. She says, book learning, vast as it may be, will always prove insufficient, even to the analytical mind, unless supported by personal experience and practice. So, book learning, apart from our lives, is not enough. But we have to relate our lives with this book learning, so that what we read will improve our understanding of our own lives, and our own lives will improve our understanding of what is written in books. And that brings us to svadhyaya, self-study, relating what we read with our own lives. We can think, how can these great beings help us to connect with this chain of past, present, and future, if we are just like parrots repeating what we don't know? Of course, we have to relate these teachings with our own lives and make it alive like tips, so that we may move from intellectual knowledge to spiritual insight. That connects us with tapas, because if we relate what we read with our own lives, that implies that we have to change ourselves. And we have to move forward in this direction. We must be the change we want to see in the world. We must be examples of the teachings. So, Svadhyaya without tapas will also prove to be insufficient. And with tapas, we create the appropriate conditions so that spiritual insight may occur. I think this is something definitely important for us Theosophists. Generally, us Theosophists, we are very idealistic people. We want a better world. We want perceptions. We want to be happy. But sometimes we are caught in ways of living that are in direct opposition to the teachings. So we have to adjust our lives to the teachings, because Svadhyaya without tapas will not be efficient. Maybe follow some practices. If they become just a routine, they may not lead us to insight either. It's very interesting what Krishnamurti said in his book, Towards Discipleship. It is a result of a seminary given in Italy in 1926. He was just speaking and people were writing down. And in this book, he says, we must take out our jacket and throw ourselves into this work. It must be something really to involve our lives into this process. And that leads us to meditation. Related to meditation, there are several very important tips in the letters Laura Holloway received from Mahatma Kutumi. Laura Holloway was a widow, an American widow. She was a psychic person. She had some psychic abilities developed, but she had some problems. And she worked in 2 months more than the best members in 5 years. She was a hard worker, and that's why she deserved to receive some advices from these perfect beings. The Mahatma says that if she could overcome, she could get self-control over her self-will and overcome her too great sensibility, she could become the most perfect pillar of the Theosophical Society. Someone that didn't persevere, went away, but had an opportunity. Like all of us, we may catch the opportunity, change our lives, improve our connection with these higher beings, and become strong pillars of the Theosophical Society. The first advice she received: try to learn to stand firm on your legs, child, before you venture walking. There was also a lot of advices concerning her moods, because she would go a step forward one day and 2 steps back the other day. And the Mahatma told her that she needed to develop a clear, calm mental state, balanced, contemplative, fit to receive impressions from outside and to transmit her own inner perceptions, because the mind can be made to work with electric swiftness in high excitement, but buddhi never. insights are flashing coming from Buddhi. So, to calm our minds, to have this equanimity is our homework. So, it's very important to be able to receive these spiritual insights. He said further, you cannot acquire psychic power until the causes of psychic debility are removed. How can you know the real from the unreal, the true from the false? Only by self-development. Okay, we all know that. But how do we develop ourselves? The Mahatma says, by first carefully guarding yourself against the causes of self-deception. Oh, so something very bad may happen, but you can see it and you prevent future disasters. This reminds me, Professor Krishna, when talking about the fire in the forest. Professor Krishna always tells us that if you are in the woods walking and you see a small fire, you can anticipate that this small fire will burn the whole forest. But as a small fire, you can stop it with your hands or with your feet. But if you are not attentive enough, it will burn, and you need a lot of trucks, maybe even helicopters to stop the fire. So, meditation, deep study is also to be very attentive, realizing what are the consequences of our acts. So, in this way, we are somehow connected with that chain of past, present, and future, realizing that the things we are living now are results of past deeds. Now, if we do so and so, such and such results will follow, and we may be able to prevent some future disasters. With attention, it's very interesting, the definition of meditation the Mahatma gave her. He said, you can do by spending a certain fixed hour or hours each day all alone in self-contemplation, writing, reading, the purification of your motives, the study and the corrections of your faults, the planning of your work in external life. These hours should be sacredly reserved for this purpose. Little by little, your sight will clear. You will find that the mist pass away, your interior faculties strengthen, your attraction towards us gain force, and certainty replaces doubt. So that's some tips about study meditation, about tapas and svadhyaya. And what about Ishvara Pranidhana? In the first letter Sinit received, he was already told that the knowledge he got imposed him the sacred duty to instruct the public and prepare the public for future possibilities by gradually opening their eyes to truth. Because the purpose of the Theosophical Society is not so much to gratify individual aspirations, but to serve our fellow man. And it's also stated that their correspondence was established for the good of the many. Synod, for the good of the many, had the task to write books, to write articles. What about us? What can we do for the good of the many? Look around. There is a lot of suffering. Are we able to learn to overcome our sufferings and help people to do so? The Mahatmas tell Synod, will you not try, for the sake of shortening the distances between us, to disentangle yourself from the net of life and death, where they are all caught, and cherish less lust and desire? Will you try? Lust and desire may keep you away from spiritual insight. Will you try? Maybe you'll not manage in the first moment, but will you try? The tip is there. And it's clear that Synod was not ready to be a disciple. Synod was not ready to link his life completely with the Mahatmas. But there was something else to be done. And the Mahatma says, there below lies your long-shared field of enterprise and usefulness. And he also comments that the advantage of Synod is that his eloquence, his ability to talk and to manifest himself was not so much in the brain, but in the heart. Like the Tathagata, like the Buddha. That's also very important, that the source of our eloquence should not be in the brain, but in the heart. So that means that we have to fill with our brains and think with our hearts. Oh, thank you very much. The voice of the silence will tell us, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shall thou be saved and hear the whole world to cry? Remain unselfish to the endless end. And I will finish my presentation with a story from Teresa of Calcutta. As you all know, Teresa of Calcutta used to take care of lepers. And there was this rich man seeing what she did, and suddenly he said, I wouldn't do what you do for any money in the world. And she said, neither do I. She was not doing it for money. It was her way of practicing Ishvara Pranidhana, her way of giving herself to life. So we can serve God by serving our fellow men, showing them that through study, meditation, and service, we can overcome our problems, our difficulties, and pass on from knowledge to insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isis, for your very, very informative analytical and enlightening views on the subject, what leads to insight, and the information regarding Mahatma's letter was certainly brilliant, which she has given here. We find an expression of this in Patanjali's Yoga Shastra, in which under Niyam, these comes, that is Swadhyay, Ishwar Pranidhan, Shauch, Santosh and Tapas, which she has very clearly, she has elucidated it in a very, very fine manner. Now I'll not take much of time. Now we have the third speaker from Australia, Mr. Gerard Brennan, who is from Australia, as I said. Mr. Brennan is a member of Blavatsky Lodge in Sydney, Australia, and is an associate member of the Theosophical Society in Ireland. He is presently the president of the Indo-Pacific Federation of the TS. He is an English teacher by profession and teaches this subject in a large secondary school in Australia. He is deeply interested in theosophy, study of comparative religion, and spirituality, especially in Advaita Vedanta. I request now Mr. Brennan to present his views on the subject.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. It's an honor to stand here in front of an audience of theosophists from all over India and around the world. The title of this talk is The Heart of Insight. Somehow, all of us were compelled to come here, often traveling long distances to reach this sacred place and rest a while together. And so, having embarked on a journey and having arrived at our destination, we may do well to consider a grander journey that awaits us. From the tumult of the world to the interiority of our own hearts. Beyond the noise and the seeming chaos that surrounds us outside lies the beauty of the Adyar estate, which gives shelter to a multitude of creatures and provides us with a palpable sense of peace, if we are open to its subtle rhythms. And at the heart of this place lies the great banyan tree itself, whose roots lie deep in the soil, and yet whose branches seem to spread across the campus, embracing all in their attempts to reach the sunlight above. And so we too, having commenced our spiritual journey, must dare to embrace a nobler, purer vision of what it means to live the theosophical life by reaching out beyond the confines of our own limited perception, our own parochial view of the world, to embrace each other in the joy of communion, to embrace all in our quest for universal brotherhood. Here in this place, just for a moment, we may gain glimpses of what it means to move beyond a mere intellectual understanding of the great teachings to a more insightful appreciation of that living wisdom, which can only be truly experienced at the heart of our sadhana, or spiritual practice, where knowledge is purified and made real through our valiant attempts to live the truth. So as knowledge begins in our head, it must inevitably sink deeper into the heart of our being, in that lived experience, where real insight may be gained by direct perception, clarified by the healing power of loving kindness. At the heart of altruism is the capacity to transcend, even for a time, any selfish preoccupations, to embrace all in their suffering and help to alleviate it. There was a famous American novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, by Harper Lee. Perhaps many of you are familiar with it, where Atticus Finch, a noble character and Scout's father, conveys to her the most important piece of advice. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his or her point of view, until you climb in their skin and walk around in it. Surely, the practice of universal brotherhood requires us to practice empathy and identify compassionately with the suffering of all those around us. Ideally, altruism and its practice takes the central focus off us as the main players in the game, thereby diminishing the potency of the ego and reinforcing that sense of unity, which binds us intimately together in the golden chain of love. As Madame Blavatsky has said, altruism is an integral part of self-development. Consider some of the great figures in world history who, through compassion and self-sacrifice, have had a tremendous impact. Figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela come to mind, who through their selfless actions have utterly transformed their respective nations. Somehow, as the ancient wisdom becomes more of a living power in our lives, we invariably move beyond the activities of the discursive mind to a place where we begin to see the truth mirrored in all life around us. So lasting insight may well occur from a calm mind and a contented heart that work together harmoniously, heart and mind combined, to reveal that which resides within and is the source of the only journey worth taking. Sitting here today, with minds and hearts attuned to these ideas, let us, just for a time, consider what it would be like to have true insight. Insight has been defined as the capacity to gain an accurate and deep understanding of something. But to truly know something, we must first have a sharp intellect to grasp it. If, for example, we want to be a doctor, we must first undergo the necessary academic training to acquire the requisite knowledge. But the best doctors in the world are not only knowledgeable, but also empathize with their patients in times of illness. We also need to have discernment and must use the faculty of discrimination, viveka, to see through what is real and unreal, combined with the practice of vairagya, or dispassion, which helps to loosen us from the bonds of conditioned existence. But what can lead to the clearest insight? It is the ability to see into the heart of things as they really are, with that inward eye, free from bias and mental speculation, seen through a pure mind and a heart full of unconditional love that seeks nothing for itself. Every heartbeat, after all, is an expression of that selfless life force that keeps us alive. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the beat of your own heart. Try that sometime. So we must attune ourselves to the rhythms of all life around us, confident in the belief that they are expressions of the one life, attempting to know itself. Albert Einstein once said, "Our task must be to free ourselves by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty." Here in Adyar, in this uplifting atmosphere, the clearest insight may arise from those moments of profound clarity stemming from the contemplation of the wondrous life forms surrounding us, where, in that unified moment, there may be no separation between the perceiver and the perceived. It's surely an experience that moves us well beyond the boundaries of the rational mind to a state of rapture. Somehow, this experience calls us out of our ordinary consciousness, but only for a moment, where, like Wordsworth, the great English poet, we may proclaim or have some intimations of immortality. Nature has a way of reminding us subtly of her beauty, but we must listen with that inward ear to hear what she really has to say. Consider the sound of a particular bird here at Adyar, who sings a melodious song that starts quite softly, but with each striking call becomes louder and louder, until the final and loudest call is followed by silence. What has her song got to teach us? Surely, her song calls us to truly listen. Mostly, though, we are probably too preoccupied with our own concerns. But if we truly listen, maybe she might have something to impart. Perhaps her resonant birdsong reminds us of the beauty and wonderment inherent in nature, which sadly at times we may forget. In John Keats's famous poem, Ode to a Nightingale, he writes of a similar experience of unbridled joy when listening to the birdsong of the nightingale. He is transformed spiritually by this experience and describes the bird as it singest of summer in full-throated ease. And he desires its freedom by stating, "Away, away, for I will fly to thee." Somehow, that sense of I was lost, and Keats experienced a vision of unity which altered his consciousness, if only for a time. Indeed, these great romantic poets decried the limitations of the rational mind and rather viewed the imagination as a higher faculty of the mind, able to perceive truth more clearly. Similarly, in the ancient wisdom tradition, we have an understanding of man's true nature as something not of the mind, nor the body, nor the intellect, nor the emotions, but of the nature of pure consciousness, knowledge, and bliss, Sat, Chit, Ananda. Perhaps the greatest insight comes in those moments of quiet recollectedness, where we try to detach ourselves from that sense of false identification. In that way, insight must come through a process of inquiry, vichara, into who we really are, who am I? Starting with a critical exploration of the teachings, where they are tested for their veracity, following a deeper contemplation of these truths, ending in a profound meditation on their underlying significance. The ancient Hindu scriptures expounded on 3 stages of self-knowledge, mentioned by also Professor Shinde, leading to Brahma Vidya, the wisdom of the gods. The first step stressed the importance of Shravanam, which involved listening with attention. Students would sit at the feet of the teacher in a sincere effort to imbibe the great truths. But we also need to listen to that great song of life and be attentive to its signs. So developing the capacity for insight involves an open and objective mind, receptive to new ideas. As the Lord Buddha said, many times what people need is not a brilliant mind that speaks, but a special heart that listens. So often in our modern world, we have lost the capacity to listen, but its practice fine-tunes our senses and prepares us for the flowering of insight. The experience of insight has been described in Japanese Zen Buddhism as satori, which is another form of radiant awakening, involving seeing into the true nature of things, one's true nature. This experience is clearly something beyond the rational mind, but can be understood through contemplation and meditation. Similarly, in the Hindu tradition, mananam was recommended in the process of acquiring self-knowledge. This involves the contemplation of and reflection on what has been heard in the light of the teacher's words and one's own understanding. This process still involves some mental speculation and yet is necessary for spiritual discernment to take place. But there is another stage still higher than this, entitled nididhyasanam, which is the third stage and requires the aspirant to meditate deeply on the truths which have been heard and contemplated. As Annie Besant says, "For our essential nature is divine, and the effort to realize it helps its growth and manifestation." She described this star as the star that shines within. Haven't you all looked up at the stars above in veneration? No harm in admiring the vastness of the universe, but true insight may largely come from looking within, daring to face ourselves honestly. So this process of self-inquiry allows the teachings to move beyond the realm of purely mental comprehension to a higher level of insight, reflected in the joy of a good heart and the practice of loving kindness. By being more aware of the unity of creation, insight flows from an affinity of all or for all that lives, and the great web of life that forms our world. This process of acquiring self-knowledge is in itself something that enables the aspirant to gradually move beyond the shackles of the personal self as he or she begins to embody wisdom in their lives through the exercise of insight. Letting go of the past and courageously taking hold of the present moment helps in freeing the mind of recurring negative thoughts and emotions, leading to renewed perception. There is an old saying in English that goes something like this: "Now let's get right to the heart of the matter." The key idea here is that through the agency of the heart, we are able to see things more clearly. While spiritual life may at times begin in the head, in the form of idealism, it must consequentially sink deep into one's heart. So the teachings begin to live there in fidelity to the ideals we began with. Only in that way can lasting insight occur, inspired by the power of benevolence in the service of all who suffer. At the heart of insight, therefore, lies, as Annie Besant points out, that star shining within each of us. And it's only a question of turning again towards its light, which dispels the darkness of ignorance, avidya. Indeed, it's amazing to consider how the light of that lone star can so tenaciously travel vast distances across the universe to remind us that we are not alone. Just as the great banyan tree is at the heart of our estate, so too compassion is at the heart of insight, liberating us from our egocentricity and freeing us to embrace all in brotherhood, recognizing no contrived distinctions. Renewed by these insights into the truth of unity, let us transform these perceptions into action, so that true insight may be shared with our fellow theosophists in the spirit of tolerance and unity and mutual respect. Let us, at this convention, wholeheartedly reach out to each other with open arms, in the hope we too may truly form a nucleus of humanity to counter the increasing tensions in our strife-torn world. And in those moments when the flame within us may not burn as brightly, perhaps as it once did, let us have the faith to remember that those who follow a star will surely find thee. And finally, bearing this in mind, next time your gaze rises towards that bright star in the heavens, remember you've only to wish upon it, for truly your dreams may well come true. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan, for your beautiful presentation with these such interesting, inspiring, and thought-provoking views on the subject, what leads to insight. The session comes to an end. Thank you.